Hello, welcome back to the Harmony Inspired Health podcast. Today we're exploring an ancient yet incredibly relevant healing practice, Qigong, and how it supports physical, emotional, and energetic well-being in modern life. My guest today is John Munro, the founder of Long White Cloud Qigong, an international Qigong school with over 400 instructors worldwide. He is also the author of the book Life-Changing Qigong, in which over 100 people share their transformational experiences with Qigong. John is a member of the World Academic Society of Medical Qigong and the National Qigong Association, and sits on the advisory board of the International Nature and Forest Therapy Alliance. So welcome to the podcast, John.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
And from that intro, it sounds like you really like Qigong. So I can't wait.
Yeah, fair enough. It's really been what I've dedicated most of my adult life to. Yeah, it's fair to say I like it quite a lot.
Brilliant. I love speaking to people who are totally connected on their dharmic path because it's so inspiring no matter what it is. And I myself have just recently, not too recent, but recently finished a master's in Chinese medicine acupuncture. And so I'm very interested in learning more about it from your perspective as well and how it all ties into that. So, how did you get into Qigong? What's your story?
All right. Well, my first introduction to Qigong was actually through my mother. I had lots and lots of health problems when I was a child growing up. And that was one of the big motivations for my mother to actually study to become a naturopath. She did then go on and have a very successful practice. So it wasn't all just about me, but that was one of the things that set her down that path because she wanted to help me with my health issues. And Western medicine wasn't getting very. When she was at naturopathic college, they have lots of different guest speakers come in to teach at least a little bit about a variety of different healing modalities so that once they're out in practice, they can know what's out there that they might be able to refer clients to that might be helpful for them. And they had someone come in and teach just a little bit of Qigong, just a little introduction to them. And my mother thought that was pretty cool. So she came home and she showed all of her kids, me being one of them, what she had learned at naturopathic college. And I thought it was pretty cool too. I was probably about 10 years old at the time. And it was cool. It was like feeling my own energy. In a way, it was like being a Jedi, in a young person's mind. And I found that fascinating. And so as I grew up, that was really the only Qigong I had been taught, but I played with it a little bit. I wouldn't say I did it in any serious way, but I played with it as I grew up. It stuck in my mind. And then later on as a young adult, I actually came into contact with the same person who had taught my mother at naturopathic college. And I asked him if he was still teaching Qigong. And he said, yes, he would teach me, but I had to study Chinese medicine as well. Because at that time it was very hard to find Qigong being taught publicly anywhere. And so it was a bit bigger of a package deal and, might have expected. It was like, if you want to do this, you got to do this properly, you got to do this seriously. And I was interested enough that that's what I did. I studied Chinese medicine and Qigong together, and that has led to, again, as I mentioned, pretty much what I focused most of my entire adult life on.
Amazing. And so I know we've already mentioned Qigong a lot of times on the podcast, but for those listening going, what is Qigong? Can you please explain what it is and how it differs from other movement-based practices like Tai Chi or yoga?
Okay, sure. So the word Qigong, it's made up of two parts. The word Qi, which I think a lot of people have heard about in this day, which means energy. The Gong part, people maybe are not so familiar with. The Gong means work or skill. So as a very direct literal translation, Qigong means energy work or energy skill. And as such, it actually includes a wide range of practices because there's lots of different ways that we can work with our energy and develop skill with our energy. The main three tools that are used commonly throughout these practices are our mind, our body, and our breath. And we use these together to connect with our energy, become aware of it, and then start to develop that skill with working with it. Now, where this relates to or other types of practices which do have a similar focus. Like there are other practices that also use mind and body and breath, right? To work effectively, because that's a great way to work. In terms of Tai Chi, when people say Tai Chi, most of the time they mean Tai Chi Chuan, which is it's a martial art. And so the Chuan means fist. So it's Tai Chi, fist, martial art. Most people nowadays don't necessarily practice it as a martial art. They do it for their health and well-being. And the reason why it works so well for their health and well-being is because it's using Qigong principles throughout the way that martial art is done. And that makes it a great thing. And so you could say that in a way, Tai Chi is a type of Qigong. Qigong is this really broad term that encompasses all the different ways we can work with our energy. And Tai Chi focuses specifically on applying those principles to a type of martial art. Comparing it to yoga, an analogy I often like to use for this is to compare Indian food and Chinese food. They both have their own rich history and tradition behind them and principles behind them as to how they work. And there's all these things, and you look at like what's the purpose of them overall. I mean, it's to be enjoyable, for the flavor to taste good. But overall, it's about trying to make us healthy and well and balanced. That's the principles behind the cuisine in the end. But yet, they're quite different from each other as well. They have this commonality, but the manifestation or the way they have developed is different. So yoga has a lot of similarities, the use of mind and body and breath, and some focus on energy, as Qigong, mind, body and breath, and focusing on energy, but the culture has shaped them in different ways. I would say one other thing, particularly in comparison to yoga, Qigong often focuses much more directly on the energy. It's right there in the name. There's this very direct focus on our energy and how it's moving inside us. Whereas in yoga, certainly there is some awareness of the energy. It is part of the practice, but often it's more a background awareness rather than a direct focus.
Yeah, I'm actually a Vedic breathwork teacher, and so practicing pranayama, and pranayama is, the breath mind control as well, and that spiritual aspect of it. But the word pranayama itself means breath control, and prana is life force energy, the similar meaning as chi. And so I'm assuming they sort of work in a similar way, but I'm really curious as to how Qigong works with Qi or prana, life force energy, and how the breath work fits into this practice. Because I know a lot of our online classes we had at uni, our teacher, our lecturer would do a Qigong practice before we sat down to learn. And it was a lot of sort of fluid movement with the breath, whereas a lot of the pranayama practice is in a seated position, not all of it. So, how does the breath work fit into the practice of Qigong, or, yeah, how are they
Sure.
sort of?
Yeah, so it's integral to the practice. Again, that word qi, if you look at the Chinese character, so I said, a direct translation is energy. A direct translation is also breath. It's simply breath. And that's where, if you look at, a lot of people from mainland China, if they look at that character, the first thing they will say is breath. And then later on, they'll, think about energy as it relates to different practices and so on. So it's very integral to the practices. Now, there's a variety of ways that can come out within the practice. As you've described from the practices you did before your lectures, often it's just one tool that's used along with movement or along with posture to work with the energy together. And in that situation, it can be sometimes that the breath is simply regulated. So we're focusing on the breath being smooth and even and deep possibly as well. So that's supporting the overall work with our energy that we do with the movement. Sometimes it can be a bit more than that, in that the breath is coordinated with different phases of the movement to support the action that is taking place. Beyond that, though, again, Qigong is a really broad term and it encompasses all these different practices. And there are within Qigong many separate breathwork practices as well, where the focus is primarily the breath, and that then affects the body, affects the mind in a variety of ways. But the main focus is, okay, what are you doing with breath? And as you've described, it's similar. It will be done in a seated position most commonly, and that's the primary driver of what you're doing.
And so, from the TCM perspective, or traditional Chinese medicine, for those listening, how does Qigong help balance the nervous system and regulate our emotions?
Sure. Well, so there's a couple of parts to that: nervous system and emotions. Obviously, the two are connected, but we can, for the sake of discussing it in a simple way, maybe look at them separately. One of the primary ways we can think about the way Qigong works with the nervous system is in the relationship between yin and yang. So yang being the more active energy, which relates to the sympathetic nervous system, the part of our nervous system that makes things go faster, go stronger, and yin being the more relaxed, passive part of our energy and relates to the parasympathetic nervous system. So inherent within Qigong practices is an aim of balancing yin and yang and having those feed smoothly one into the other. Because within Chinese philosophy, yin is never separate from yang. They're always connected. They're like two sides of a coin. You can't truly tear them apart. But what we're interested in is them flowing smoothly one to the other in a way that supports each other rather than maybe getting stuck in one phase or another. And so in our lives, sometimes we can get stuck in one of those phases. We can stuck too activated, and trying to do too much all the time, and we're at this high level energy, or we can actually get stuck at a low level of energy too, and we're stuck there, and we can't activate our energy properly. Neither of these are good for us. What's healthy for us is to alternate between these two: activity, rest. Sleep, wake up, sleep, wake up, day, night. It's one of those natural patterns of nature, and Qigong inherently works to cycle between these states. Yin and yang, yin and yang. And again, this can relate to the way we use our breath. It can relate to movements that specifically stimulate the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system and getting that activation between them. And then, of course, it does relate to the mind and how we think about things as well. These all get combined together. So sometimes we focus on one part at a time. Sometimes it's very much the movement. Sometimes it's the breath. Sometimes it's the mind. Well, they do get integrated in quite sophisticated ways into some of these moving practices that you've had some experience with. So going from there, hopefully that's enough of a little description of how it relates to the nervous system into the emotions themselves. Now, of course, our nervous system affects our emotions. Of course it does. But from a Chinese perspective, we go a little bit further and we look at the role of the organs as they relate to different emotions as well. Because a common misconception that people have, if they haven't really spent much time with this sort of thing, is to think that our emotions are in our head. Like we think our emotions. We don't. Those are thoughts. Emotions are in our body. Now, our thoughts play a big role in how we perceive things and therefore how our body responds. So, yeah, it's important to work with our mind. But the actual emotion itself is the response inside our body to the stimulus we perceive in the world around us. And when we respond, our organs respond in different ways for different emotions. Some emotions put more energy into the heart and make that more active. Some emotions put more energy into the liver, make that more active. Some put it into the kidneys, and so on. And so Chinese medicine recognizes this connection between emotions directly to the function of the organ. And within Chinese medicine, again, there's a range of tools we can use, but specifically Qigong is one of those that we can use to help that energy move through so it doesn't get stuck and so it flows through smoothly. I think something that's really helpful for us to understand about our emotions, again, sometimes people get this idea that some emotions are good and other emotions are bad. It's not quite accurate. All of our emotions are good, or all of them have the potential to be good. They're what give us motivation and drive in life. It's what makes life interesting. Where they become harmful for us is if they are excessive. Like if they become too strong, that can be too strong of a stimulus inside us and cause problems. Or if they become stuck. And instead of experiencing them and allowing that to flow through us, allowing that to shape our response to the world around us, we hold on to them. That then causes an ongoing strain on the function of our body, of our organ, of our hormones, and so on, and can lead to problems. So we want to experience our emotions. That's very important. And the Qigong a variety of different Qigong practices can work specifically with different organs to help us to experience that fully and then allow the energy to flow so it doesn't get stuck with them.
Yeah, beautiful. There's so much amazing stuff you said there, and I want to link it all together because I love trying to integrate some, the Ayurvedic principles with the TCM principles and see how they sort of fit from like that Eastern medicine philosophy. Talking about the yin and the yang, so you're speaking about the Qigong helping support both yin and yang. And I know when we look at, say, pranayama, so I'll use breath work, Vedic breath work as an example against Qigong. And so we do different techniques to support the individual's constitution, depending if they're Vata, Kapha, or Pitta. So for instance, like you were talking more about that sort of stagnation, that yin, that would be more of a kapha dosha. And so we would do a breath work that's more of a kapalabhati, breath of fire, to ignite that fire, that motivation, and get that prana sort of like working through heat. And say we're more vata, we might do a nadi shodhana, which is alternate nostril breathing to balance the yin and the yang, so the masculine and the feminine. And then maybe a pitta would do more of a shitali breath, which is cooling because they're more hot in nature. And so they need more calming but cooling. And so I did want to understand how Qigong worked with the Zhang Fu organs, which you've already touched on, which is amazing because you went right there anyway. So are there different breaths or Qigong techniques, that you can do for those organ systems? And also, can we go into what organ system expresses what emotion? So like the kidneys and the fear, and then maybe just giving an example of some sort of technique that we can do for just one or two of the organs, just so we can see it all as like this big, beautiful picture.
Yeah, okay. Um, so the way that Chinese medicine and philosophy divides things up is a little bit different from the Indian. As we talked about, Indian food, Chinese food, they're both relevant, they're both beautiful, they both have a lot of wisdom in them. And so you've talked about the doshas being a way that is used within the Vedic system. In Chinese philosophy, probably the thing that applies in a similar way is the five elements. And so, in a similar way as Vata, Kapha, Pitta, you can say someone is more this, more that. From a Chinese perspective, you can look at how someone's energy is and how their constitution is relative to the five elements. You can say, oh, that person's really earthy, that person's more watery, that person's more fiery, and that's sort of the way that categorization will work more. In terms of which emotions relate to which organs and how, I think this is a really interesting thing for people to understand because it's a very direct and practical thing, actually. Often people look at these ancient practices and think they're all esoteric and airy-fairy, and it's like, oh, no, 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 no. There's a reason why they developed the way they did, and it's very, very practical. So starting with the kidneys, as you mentioned, right on top of our kidneys sit our adrenal glands. So kidneys like this, like the adrenal glands, like right on top of it, sitting there. And so when we experience some emotions, our body releases adrenaline. The primary emotion we often think of for that is fear. We get an adrenal dump when we have fear. But related to that also is excitement. We also get adrenaline from excitement. And so in many ways, fear and excitement are kind of the same emotion. It's just we're interpreting that stimulus in a different way. And this, of course, is why a lot of people love things like roller coasters or horror movies. Because it's exciting.
I do
Right?
not, for the record.
Yeah, well, we don't all. But again, there's this similarity. And when we understand that that emotion is actually connected to a physiological response, that then puts us in the driver's seat of the energy of that emotion. We can now go, okay, I've got this response. What do I want to do with it? And that can lead us to use that energy in a healthy, useful way rather than maybe a way that's not going to be healthy for us. And so this is one of the great things that comes from Qigong practice is a much higher level of self-awareness and just understanding. And then we can steer our way through life more easily. So back to the kidneys, you asked for like really specific practices you can do. Probably the simplest one you can do for the kidneys is to put your hands on them. So in your lower back, put your hands on them. Now, if you want to make this stronger, you might activate the energy in your hands a little bit first. So you might rub your hands together or even clap them together to really stimulate the nerves, get the blood flowing to them. And then just put your hands in your lower back and feel that warmth, feel that energy from your hands going in to support your kidneys. And
Love
just
that.
breathe. Feel the way the kidneys naturally expand and contract in the lower back with your breath. And let that energy from your hands go and support the kidneys. Super, 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 super simple. We can go a lot further with that. There's different movements. A classic one is one where we come like this and we get this activation of the muscles down into the lower back and so on. Maybe a little hard for me to show too much of that right there, but where we can start to work with the energy there. Another organ, another emotion. So kidneys, that's the water element. And the water element has the character of its movement is it contracts, pulls in. And so with fear, our energy contracts in the lower back, and that sends a burst of energy up the spine. The contraction in the lower back sends that energy up. So the next one in the cycle of the 5 elements is the wood element. And so the primary organ relating to that is the liver. So the wood element is the one that carries on that rising energy and puts it into action. In terms of hormones, one of the primary hormones related to that is cortisol. Now again, just like emotions, sometimes we get this weird idea that some hormones are good and some hormones are bad. And cortisol is one of those ones that gets a really bad reputation, like, oh, cortisol, that's bad. If it was so bad, our body wouldn't make it, right? We need cortisol. Not having enough cortisol is a serious medical condition. It's literally the hormone that gets us up and out of bed in the morning. Literally. So it's all about balance and having that flow in a healthy way. So when we need an extra burst of energy, our body tends to drop more cortisol into our system. And that then causes the liver to release the glycogen that it holds inside it. So glycogen is the body's natural sugar, and it dumps it into the bloodstream so we can have more energy to do something. And then if it gets under strain for too long, that can lead to the way it works with fat and so on. But this is why cortisol affects the liver so much. It sends that energy into the system. The emotion related with that strong surge of energy is anger. And you think about it, anger, again, it's a physiological response. And how we use that energy depends on how we interpret that. Anger is very much the same as passion. We don't get angry about things we don't care about. Anger is just a surge of energy to do something about something we care about. And when we understand that, we can start to use it in a healthy way. We can start to recognize, hey, this anger is a natural thing. It's not a bad thing. I don't want it to be excessive. That's going to be a bad thing. I don't want to hold on to it. That's going to be a bad thing. But what can I do to use this? Use my passion to do something good, whether it be for myself, whether it be for other people, and so on. Maybe a different aspect of practice we can talk about for this one. Again, I'm trying to keep it simple so I don't have to stand up and move around. There's lots of movements that we use for all of these different things as well to quite literally stretch and open these different areas of our body, also to affect the meridian connected to them that's used in acupuncture and so on. But we can use sound to specifically cause vibrations to move through our different organs. And this one for the liver is an interesting one. So our body instinctively understands this. And when we experience different emotions, we instinctively make different sounds. And those sounds then vibrate the organs to help that energy be released and move through rather than get stuck. The sound, well, one of the sounds, there's always more than one of the sounds that relates to the liver organ and that emotion of anger or passion, we'll explore this in a few steps because we'll take it its most raw primal and then we'll refine it and see if we can still feel it. It's good to put your hand on your liver while you're doing this so that you can feel what's going on inside your body. You can feel that vibration. So for anyone watching this or just listening to it, your liver is on the right side of the lower part of your ribs. It actually extends across to the left side as well. It's a big, long, triangular organ, but the biggest part is on the right side. So if you put it on the lower portion of your ribs, on the right-hand side. So what kind of sound do we instinctively make when we're angry or passionate? Growl. Yeah? So if we make a grrr sound, like G-R-R-R, and see what kind of vibration we can feel here in our ribs. So we take a deep breath in. Can you feel how there's like a little there in your liver, right? Cool. So that's very primal. It's quite rough. We can refine that to make a smoother vibration to help that energy come through in a smoother way. So instead of grr, we'll go like E-R-R-R, and see what difference this makes to the vibration. So we take a deep breath in. Can you feel there's now, it's like instead of a big lumpy vibration, it's like a smoother one. And then we can smooth it out even further. And this time we'll go air. So it's still got the same quality to it, but we're getting finer now. So we'll take a deep breath in. Air. Can you feel that vibration there?
Mm. It's kind of like when you like omming. It's like that sound
Yeah.
resonance. Yeah.
So om
Mm.
is a well-rounded sound. Om vibrates through the whole being. And it's really great for just balancing things as one whole. This type of sound, and again, this is just one for this one organ, this one element, this one set of emotions, is where we're focusing on some of the parts, clear energy that might be stuck within them. Om brings it all together. So that is a great sound to use.
It's like each chakra has a different sound as well, like whether it be lam, ram. Yeah.
Yes, similar concept, similar concept. Maybe to round this out, I don't think maybe we'll have time to get through all of the five elements and all of the organs and emotions connected to them. But we could maybe talk a little bit about the fire element, and I'll bring in a different type of practice that's going to be easy enough to show just sitting here like this. So it's a good one to demonstrate. So our heart relates to the fire element. We can stimulate that by putting our hands on it, by making sounds, by all these other things as well, and by using movement. And this is going to be a nice, easy one to show. So I'll just tilt my camera down a little bit, make it a little bit better. We're going to do a super simple movement. There's a range of different movements we can use for this. But for this movement, we're just going to cross our hands in front of our body. And then we'll inhale as we open our arms to the side, and exhale, close them back in. So we inhale, we expand, we feel an opening, expansion through the chest. Exhale, relax back in. We close back around to protect the heart. So we inhale, we expand, we release if anything's got stuck, held inside the heart. And exhale, we relax, close back in, protecting the heart. Inhale, so the fire is expansive, and so the movement mirrors the expansive quality of the fire. And then exhale, we make sure to also protect the fire. And so we'll finish that one there. But just a super simple example of a movement that relates to that.
I love that one. That's really nice. It was really good, really expansive, but then also self-nurturing, like coming back to self. So it's kind
Yeah.
of like that inner self-reflection, that flame sort of like generated within.
And again, there's a balance there between the yin and the yang, just within the one movement. There's a balancing between the opening and closing, the expanding and releasing, the closing and protecting. And this we find inherent throughout Qigong practices, that there's this balance and quality. So, I talked very briefly about, different ways of stimulating each of the organs. We can use sound for each one of those organs and emotions. We can use movement for each one of those organs and emotions. There's lots of different tools and techniques that we can use.
I think that's the thing with Eastern medicine or techniques. It's so in depth. Like we can sit here and do a 30, 40-minute podcast episode, but it's only just like skimming the surface. I mean, we couldn't even go through all of the organs. And it's like Ayurveda, it's so in depth, and so is TCM and Qigong. And it's just touching the surface. But I'm hoping that this has really sparked people's interest, because I love how you have been able to bring the practice in a really beautiful sort of like with regards to TCM and the philosophy, but also the science of it, and even sort of highlighting the benefits, the physical benefits, such as like hormonal balance. It sounds like amazing for that, and digestion, and our immune system, and so on. So I think it's a really beautiful, well-rounded practice. But again, it I can see now how deep it really goes, because it like hits on the emotional, the physical, the mental, that spiritual aspect of it all. And yeah, it's so wonderful. So what about for people who are listening and they're like, well, I've never done Qigong. Can I do it at home, or do I have to go find a Qigong instructor? Like, what is their best way to get started with this practice at home?
Yeah, absolutely. So Qigong is a very safe, and for the most part, it's gentle practices. There are some quite vigorous ones that you might do at some stage, but for most people, they start with very gentle practices, and as such, you can do it quite safely by yourself at home. A couple of things you might like to try. So on the longwhitecloudqigong.com website, which is my school's website, we have a range of different free videos of Qigong practices that you can just find on there and just give it a try and see how it feels to you. We also have a free introduction to Qigong theory and practice course. It's an online course. And so that's great for people who want to go beyond just trying a few movements and seeing how it feels, but into understanding how it works. And in that course, we do use some basic practices. So there's some good practices for you to do in there as well. But we get into the explaining, how does this work? How is our mind involved in the practice to give it its effect? How are we using our breath within our practice to give it its effect? How is the movement working in a physical way to activate our energy and create the results that we want? So I think people would also find that a really interesting place to make a start and really understand what they're doing. Of course, there's a lot to go into beyond that, into all the depths that what you can apply it to. But that's a great place to start to get some benefit for yourself and understand what it is that you're doing.
Yeah, amazing. And you train Qigong practitioners as well? So you train people to become Qigong practitioners?
Yeah, absolutely. So for those who really want to go deep into it, we do run Qigong instructor certification programs. We do those online. Some people go like, really? Online? You can do it online? Yeah, you can. It's amazing technology. We can see each other. We can talk to each other. We can see what you're doing. We can actually do, a very good job in training online, and we go into a lot of depth into a range of different practices to help people really understand all how they work, how it relates to organs and meridians and the elements and the different aspects of the energy.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much. And do you have anything that you would love the listeners to take away from this conversation, whether it be busting some myths about Qigong or misconceptions or something to do with the practice that they can do at home? Is there like a take home message that you would really love to get out to our listeners?
Maybe two,
Love
more than
that.
one. One is I think it's really healthy for us to start to normalize the idea of working with our energy as just a normal thing. We're all experiencing our energy all the time. In many ways, our energy is the combination of all the aspects of our being and how they're working together. And it sums everything up. And by looking at things in that way, we often get the more complete picture. And this applies to, just what's going on within our body, but also what's going on within our relationships and our environment. Looking at it in the context of energy can be a really useful way to look at things. And sometimes people, again, they write that off as something airy-fairy, and it doesn't need to be. It can also be something really practical, and I think there's a lot of value to that. So that's one takeaway I think would be good. The other is related to the idea of balance and skill that we've talked about a little bit here. One of the things I talked about in terms of some of those emotions was, well, we have this emotion, and sometimes we tend to interpret it in one way, but we can also interpret it in another way. And when we start to recognize that, then we start to have skill. We start to not be just subject to thinking that things are happening to us and there was nothing we could do about it, but recognizing, hey, yes, we might have certain responses, but we can now shape what we do with them. And that skill is a valuable thing. I think it's a valuable perspective to have in our life, to embrace the reality of what's happening to us, not deny it, not hide it, not, try to bury it away, but then recognize that, hey, we actually have some power to shape what happens next and what we do with what we've experienced.
Beautiful. Beautifully said. And so you've mentioned your business is called Long White Cloud Qigong. So if anyone is interested in learning more about Qigong for themselves and practice, or if you are practitioners listening and would love to offer that to your clients, you can also do the practitioner course. And do you have a favorite social media hang where people can connect with you?
Yeah, probably our Instagram.
You're like, no,
Yeah. So
not for me.
what's that?
You're like, no, no,
I'm
not
not.
for
I'm not that big on social media, but we are active on social media. So we have our Instagram. It's just Long White Cloud Qigong is one word. Or I also have a YouTube channel where I do vlogs where I just talk about lots of little details about Qigong and how how it relates to different things. And so that one is called Qi Life. So QI Life. So that one might be interesting for people as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom with us. And thank you to all of our listeners. If you've enjoyed this episode, please share it with somebody else who you think might enjoy it as well. And reach out to myself or John. Go to his YouTube. You can go to my Instagram, Harmony Inspired Ayurveda. Yeah. And like I said, these type of practices, whether you're a health coach or a health and wellness practitioner, a healer, it's so beautiful to be able to have a somatic practice that you can send your clients home with as well, so that that transformation never ends. And so even blending the Qigong, the beautiful Qigong that John's explained, and go and look at his stuff and go to his website, because it sounds like he's got heaps of information, and even blending that with the Vedic breathwork practices. I do have an ISL Vedic breathwork practitioner course coming up in May. So if you're interested in that, I will also have the link to that in the show notes, as well as John's link to his long white cloud Qigong. All right. Thank you and namaste.
Thank you.